They say love conquers all. But what happens when pride, wealth, and the fear of public humiliation push a marriage to its breaking point? Nate Lancaster, one of the most influential millionaires in New York, had built an empire with his sharp business acumen and relentless ambition. He was a man accustomed to power, control, and the admiration of the elite. Yet, behind the closed doors of his grand estate, his marriage was crumbling. His wife, Isabel, was once the woman who had captured his heart with her intelligence and quiet strength. But now, as she carried their unborn child, she battled insecurities that he failed to acknowledge. And when the city's most exclusive gala was announced, Nate made a decision that would change everything. He refused to take her, told her she was unpresentable, that she no longer fit his world. What he didn't know was that one extraordinary transformation would not only stun the world, but also force him to confront everything he thought he knew about beauty, power, and love. Nathaniel rose before dawn, as he did every morning. By the time the first hint of light touched the skyline, he was already at his desk, reviewing emails from overseas partners, responding to investors, and approving multi-million-dollar deals. The constant buzz of his phone, the pressure of negotiations, he thrived on it. To the world, he was a vision of success. His estate in Riverside Heights, a secluded, ultra-exclusive neighborhood on the outskirts of Manhattan, was a testament to his status. Tall marble pillars framed the entrance, flanked by pristine hedges sculpted to perfection. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens, reflecting the world of wealth he had meticulously curated. Inside, the mansion was just as grand. Opulent, polished, flawless. But there was one place that felt different. The master bedroom. Here, among the luxury, traces of Isabel softened the edges of his world. The faint scent of lavender lingered in the air from the lotions she used. Her soft footprints pressed into the plush carpet. A forgotten book lay on the nightstand, marked at a page she never had the time to finish. It was here, in the quiet hours, that Nate sometimes remembered who they used to be. They had met years ago at a business conference in Chicago, back when Nate was still a rising entrepreneur. Hungry, ambitious, trying to carve his name into the industry. Isabel had been the event coordinator, effortlessly managing the chaos around her. She was sharp, resourceful, and completely unimpressed by his wealth and charm. She didn't fall for his grand displays or carefully rehearsed speeches. She saw through the bravado, and that was what made him fall for her. She reminded him that success wasn't just about wealth and reputation, it was about the people you shared it with. Because of her, he had once donated generously to charities. Because of her, he had once spent weekends volunteering. Because of her, he had once been more than just a businessman. But that felt like a lifetime ago. Now, all he cared about was how the world saw him. And that obsession was about to cost him everything. Compassion. Once it had defined Nathaniel Lancaster, but now it felt like a distant memory. Over the last year, Lancaster Tech had skyrocketed to global success. Investors from Tokyo to Berlin poured millions into his software empire. Venture capital turned his small startup into a multinational powerhouse. And as his business grew, his attention scattered. His mind was constantly occupied. Fluctuating stock prices, high-profile mergers, and billion-dollar deals. But while Nate was conquering the business world, Isabel was facing a battle of her own. With each passing week, her pregnancy progressed. She felt sicker, more exhausted, more alone. She tried to share her joys and fears with him, but Nate was rarely around long enough to truly listen. Even when he was home, his mind wasn't. Their conversations had shrunk to small talk. The effortless laughter they once shared had been replaced by routine questions and half-hearted nods. Even his compliments had disappeared. Instead, there were only detached observations. "You look tired. This pregnancy is really wearing you out." His eyes never left his phone when he said it. It stung every time. She missed the man she married. The man who once stayed up all night dreaming with her about the future they would build together. The man who promised they would raise children who valued love over status. But maybe Nate had become exactly the kind of man she had once feared he would be. A man obsessed with perfection, power, and public image. And if that was who he was now, then where did that leave her? That morning, Isabel awoke to an empty bed. A pang of loneliness hit her as she reached for her phone. A new message from Nate flashed across the screen. Big event next weekend. Hosted by Richard Calloway. Need to impress. Can you handle the estate arrangements? Her stomach twisted. He was attending one of the biggest tech gatherings of the year. The room would be filled with billionaires, innovators, philanthropists, yet not once did he mention taking her along. And that, more than anything, confirmed her worst fear. She no longer fit into the image he wanted the world to see. Later that morning, Isabel made her way to the kitchen, where the familiar scent of freshly brewed tea filled the air. At the counter, Mrs. Cho, their longtime housekeeper, carefully arranged a platter of sliced fruit. A petite woman in her mid-50s, Mrs. Cho had worked for the Lancaster family for years. Originally from Seoul, she carried herself with the quiet grace of someone who had seen more than she let on. "You must eat something, Mrs. Lancaster," she fussed gently, setting the plate in front of Isabel. "You're not just eating for yourself anymore." Isabel smiled politely, picking at a piece of mango. But her mind was elsewhere. She wanted to ask Mrs. Cho if she had noticed changes in Nate, if she, too, had seen the way he had grown colder, more distant. But she couldn't bring herself to say the words. It was one thing to suspect your husband no longer found you attractive. It was another to admit it out loud. Excusing herself, she walked into the sitting room. The morning sun poured through the tall French windows, illuminating the space with golden light. She placed a hand on her stomach, closing her eyes as she felt the soft flutter of tiny kicks. This child is half me and half him. For a brief moment, that thought filled her with hope. But before she could lose herself in the feeling, she heard footsteps echoing across the polished floors. She looked up. Nathaniel. He had just returned from a morning meeting, his personal assistant, Reynolds, trailing behind him, clipboard in hand, prepared for another packed schedule. "Hey," Isabel said softly, her eyes searching his face. He glanced at her. "Hello, Isabel." Formal, distant, as if they were strangers. Reynolds cleared his throat, shifting the files in his hands. For a split second, she considered saying it, asking him why he didn't invite her to the event, why he barely looked at her anymore. But instead, she asked something safer. "How's your day looking?" "Busy as usual," Nate said automatically. Then, for the first time in weeks, he stepped closer. She braced herself, hoping, just maybe, he was about to say something real. Something that mattered. For a moment, Isabel thought he was about to kiss her on the cheek, some small show of affection, some reassurance that he still saw her. But instead, Nate frowned. His gaze swept over her, assessing, judging. "You look tired." She barely had time to process the sting of his words before he continued. "I've been thinking about the Calloway Gala next weekend," he said, his tone shifting into business mode. "It's a major event. Global philanthropists, A-list celebrities, top-tier tech moguls. Richard Calloway himself will be there. There's even talk that Jeff Bezos might show up, maybe even Oprah." A flicker of excitement sparked in Isabel's chest. "Yes," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I read your text. I know how important this is to you." Maybe, just maybe, he was finally including her in something. Maybe he wanted her by his side. But then Nate let out a sigh, the kind of sigh that meant bad news was coming. Standing beside him, Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension. Finally, Nate spoke. "I don't think it's the best idea for you to come this time." The words hit her like a slap. For a moment, she could only stare at him, as if she had misheard. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nate hesitated, avoiding eye contact. "You have a lot on your plate with the pregnancy," he said, as if he were doing her a favor. "These events can be exhausting." He was trying to sound reasonable, logical, but then he met her gaze with a steely glint and continued. "It's a big social moment. I need to show everyone that I'm, focused." And just like that, she understood. The unspoken words hung between them, suffocating her. "You're not presentable. You don't fit the image I need to uphold." She exhaled shakily. "Nate, I've supported you for years." "I know," he interrupted, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "But you haven't been feeling well. And well—" He trailed off, letting the meaning hang in the air. Beside him, Reynolds cleared his throat and silently slipped out of the room, sensing that he didn't belong in this conversation. The air felt heavier. Isabel's hands curled into fists. Is this about how I look? A lump formed in her throat. Her voice wavered, but she couldn't keep it inside any longer. Have I become so hideous to you? Nate didn't answer right away, and that silence was the loudest answer of all. She turned away, her shoulders trembling. For a brief moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, something almost like remorse. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. You're overreacting, he muttered. We can talk about this later. And just like that, he was gone, disappearing down the hallway, leaving her alone. The golden sunlight from the sitting room window streamed over her, but she had never felt colder. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling the faint flutter of her baby's movements. A part of her wanted to scream. A part of her wanted to beg him to see her again, to remember the woman he once loved. But mostly, she just felt numb. Because in that moment, she realized something crucial. Nathaniel Lancaster's transformation was nearly complete. He had become the kind of man who measured his worth by power and image. And where did that leave her? Where did that leave their child? That evening, Isabel locked herself in the master bedroom, trying to calm the storm inside her. Outside, the estate grounds stretched endlessly in the twilight. The expansive lawn lay untouched. The pool shimmered under lamplight. The carefully manicured rose garden she once loved now felt lifeless. It was all so beautiful. And yet, it had never felt so empty. Memories flooded back. She thought of their wedding day, back when Nate was still the man who swore he didn't care about displays of wealth. Back when he held her hands in a small ceremony in Napa Valley, surrounded only by their closest friends and family. I don't care about the size of the wedding, he had told her, his voice full of love, sincerity, and promise. I just want to call you my wife. He had been so genuine, so real, so in love. Where had that man gone? A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She blinked rapidly, wiping away the tears before calling out. Come in. The door creaked open, and Naomi Davis stepped inside. Her best friend, the only person who wasn't afraid to challenge Nate's cold, intimidating aura. A fierce, brilliant public relations consultant, Naomi had always been the voice of reason and strength in Isabel's life. She closed the door gently behind her, her eyes scanning Isabel's face. Hey, Naomi said softly, stepping closer, and just like that, Isabel broke. Naomi closed the door behind her, her sharp eyes scanning Isabel's face. I ran into Reynolds on my way in, she said, setting her purse on a nearby chair. He looked worried. Isabel let out a dry, humorless laugh. He's probably scared I'll have a meltdown before the baby is even born. Naomi didn't smile. Instead, she crossed the room and sat beside Isabel on the bed, concern etched across her features. Okay, what's going on? You look miserable. For a moment, Isabel hesitated. But then it all came pouring out. She told Naomi everything, how Nate had criticized her appearance, how he had refused to take her to the Callaway Gala, how he had made her feel like she no longer belonged in his world. She tried to sound indifferent, but her heartbreak bled into every word. He said it's because I'm tired, because I'm pregnant, but I know the real reason. Her voice wavered. He thinks I'm not good enough for his new social circle. Naomi's expression darkened. That's awful. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. I know Nate's been caught up in all this newfound fame, but I never thought he'd be this shallow. You're his wife, Isabel. This should be a joyful time for both of you, preparing for your baby, building your future, not this. Isabel's fingers fidgeted with the hem of her dress. Her emotions tangled between love, doubt, and frustration. Sometimes I wonder if it was a mistake to marry him, she admitted softly. Not because I don't love him, but because maybe I can't live up to his standards anymore. Naomi's eyes flashed with intensity. You are not the problem here, honey. She folded her arms, leaning in. Nate's lost sight of what actually matters. He thinks rubbing shoulders with billionaires means he needs a perfect trophy wife by his side. That's ridiculous. And it's even more ridiculous considering you're carrying his child. A single tear slipped from Isabel's eye. I know, she whispered. I just don't know what to do. Naomi's expression shifted from anger to determination. He's not going to that party alone. Isabel blinked. What? You, Naomi declared, are going to make an appearance, and you're going to look absolutely stunning. Isabel hesitated. But how? She gestured to herself. Her tired eyes, her swollen belly, the exhaustion she felt in every bone. I mean, I do feel tired, Naomi. I am pregnant. I can't exactly hide that. You don't have to hide it. Naomi shook her head firmly. Pregnancy is powerful, it's beautiful, and we're gonna work with it, not against it. She grabbed Isabel's hands. I have connections. Stylists, designers, makeup artists, people who work with celebrities for major events. We'll make you shine, Isabel. Not in some cheap, flashy way, but with elegance, with confidence. We're going to remind Nate exactly who he married. A swirl of emotions rose in Isabel's chest. Hope, anxiety, anger, love. I want to believe that can help, she admitted. But what if it doesn't change the way he sees me? Naomi wrapped an arm around her. Then at least you'll know you tried, she said gently. And more importantly, you'll do this for yourself. Because you deserve to walk into that gala with your head held high, pregnant or not, looking incredible. She pulled back and grinned. But trust me, he's going to see it. The next morning, Naomi wasted no time. Her phone was practically glued to her ear as she made a flurry of calls, booking appointments with the best in the industry. Hairstylists, makeup artists, personal shoppers, and most importantly, a designer. One name stood out. Angeline Rossi, an avant-garde fashion icon who had designed maternity couture for Hollywood's elite. By the following afternoon, Angeline arrived at the Lancaster estate. She was a whirlwind of creativity. A tall, statuesque woman with a sleek black bob dressed in a striking hot pink jumpsuit. She carried a leather portfolio packed with fabric swatches and sketches, her movements swift and decisive. The moment she laid eyes on Isabel, her expression lit up. Darling, you are glowing. She reached out, gently resting a hand on Isabel's belly. Now, let's see what we can do to enhance that absolute goddess energy. For the first time in a long time, Isabel felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't doubt, it was relief. Because Angeline wasn't looking at her with pity. She wasn't treating her like a burden or a woman who had let herself go. She was treating her like a masterpiece in progress. And for the first time in a long time, Isabel was ready to see herself that way too. For the first time in a long time, Isabel felt excitement instead of doubt. Angeline wasn't just fitting her for a dress, she was rebuilding her confidence, one stitch at a time. They spent hours in the sitting room, sorting through sketches, experimenting with fabrics, testing silhouettes. Let the bump be the star, Angeline declared, draping a shimmering fabric over Isabel's figure. No reason to hide it. Pregnancy is power, darling. We're going to celebrate it. Naomi supervised the process, occasionally pausing to text potential makeup artists, nodding in approval or suggesting different styles. Meanwhile, Isabel found herself catching glimpses of Nate passing by in the hallway. He didn't enter. He didn't say anything. But every time he glanced inside and saw Angeline draping fabric over Isabel's growing belly, his brow furrowed in confusion, before he hurried off to another meeting. Almost as if he didn't know what to make of it. At first, the fittings were an emotional roller coaster. For months, all Isabel had seen in the mirror was a body she barely recognized. Wider hips, softer curves, a face that looked just a little more tired every day. She had learned to look away. But Angeline wouldn't let her. This isn't about hiding, Isabel. This is about owning who you are. You are a mother. You are powerful. Slowly, Isabel began to believe it. She saw how a well-tailored dress could accentuate her body in ways that made her feel beautiful again. How certain colors, deep sapphire, emerald green, brought out the light in her eyes. And for the first time in months, she looked at her reflection and whispered to herself, I am carrying life. Not as an apology, but as a statement of pride. Halfway through the session, Naomi glanced at her phone and then gasped, Oh my God, Isabel, you won't believe this. Isabel looked up, startled. What? Naomi's eyes widened. Richard Calloway just confirmed the guest list. She scrolled rapidly, excitement lighting up her face. Listen to this. Kim Kardashian, Beyoncé, Prince Harry, Oprah Winfrey. This isn't just a gala anymore. It's basically the Met Gala of the philanthropic world. Isabel's stomach twisted. Excitement? Or sheer terror? Wow, she managed. That's a lot. Angeline clapped her hands together. All the more reason to make sure your look is absolutely sensational. Trust me, darling, when we're done, no one will be able to take their eyes off you. The dress fittings continued for hours. Lavender silk, a sleek black ensemble with shimmering silver accents. A a deep forest green gown that highlighted her natural glow. For each look, Angeline analyzed her posture, adjusting drapes and lines, murmuring about form and structure like an artist sculpting her masterpiece. Then, after nearly 4 hours, she stepped back, surveyed her work, and smiled with satisfaction. I've got it. The final choice, a bespoke gown in midnight blue. Crafted from fine silk, it hugged Isabel's figure at the bust before flowing gracefully over her growing belly. Delicate lace traced the neckline, adding a touch of timeless elegance. It was soft, powerful, breathtakingly regal. And when Isabel stood before the full-length mirror, she froze, because the woman staring back at her was not the same woman who had walked into this room hours ago. This woman stood taller. This woman carried herself with confidence. This woman wasn't hiding, she was owning her presence. Tears welled up in her eyes, but for once, they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of awe. Naomi beamed. You look stunning, Isabel. Angeline winked. Now, let's talk accessories and shoes. Comfort is key, of course, but that doesn't mean we can't make a statement. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the estate grounds, and for a moment, Isabel's thoughts drifted to Nate. Where was he? Buried in meetings? Completely oblivious to the transformation happening under this very roof? And when he finally saw her, would it even matter to him? The doubt still lingered, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the spark of hope Angeline and Naomi had reignited within her. In 2 weeks, she would walk into that gala, not for Nate, not to win him back, but to remind herself that she was strong, that she was resilient, that she deserved love and respect, no matter how presentable she looked in the eyes of the elite. And this time, she wouldn't let anyone make her forget it. While Isabel was undergoing her transformation, Nathaniel Lancaster was caught in a very different storm. The Callaway Gala wasn't just a social event, it was an arena, a place where deals were made, partnerships were forged, and power shifted hands. Nate had one goal: to secure a groundbreaking collaboration for his latest initiative, a philanthropic tech program that used cutting-edge AI to combat climate change. On the surface, it sounded noble. Lancaster Tech, saving the planet. But those who knew him best, Naomi, and even his assistant Reynolds, saw the truth. Nate wasn't obsessed with the mission. He was obsessed with the PR potential. For days, he was locked in marathon meetings, refining his pitch, dissecting statistics, and strategizing how to impress the most powerful names in the world. One afternoon, he sat in the sleek conference room of Lancaster Tech, facing a small group of hand-picked investors. Multiple screens displayed graphs and projections, each meticulously designed to showcase his vision. Nate paced in front of them, his energy razor-sharp. Our AI can predict climate-related disasters before they happen, he explained. We'll show them the data: rising sea levels, shifting weather patterns, agricultural threats. Then we propose a partnership, matching funds, research grants, high-impact philanthropy. We don't just want to be in the conversation. We want to be the leader. Reynolds nodded, taking rapid notes. I've scheduled a private meeting with Callaway's philanthropic team, he said. They're exploring potential synergy with the Callaway Foundation. If we make a strong impression, Nate's eyes lit up. That's exactly what we need. A high-profile philanthropic tie. That's not just good press, that's real influence. Across the table, one of the investors, Martin Rosario, a seasoned entrepreneur in his 50s, shifted uncomfortably. I admire the ambition, Nate, he said. But I have a question. Where does your wife factor into all of this? Nate stiffened. He had prepared for this question. He wouldn't lie about Isabel's absence. He would simply frame it differently. She's not coming, he said coolly. She's pregnant. The event would be too exhausting for her. Martin didn't look convinced. Are you sure that's wise? He pressed. People admire family unity, especially when you're launching a philanthropic project. A pregnant wife by your side? That could reinforce your entire narrative. Future generations, sustainability, it all ties together. A muscle in Nate's jaw tightened. Her health comes first, he replied, his tone clipped. I've made my decision. The event is in less than 2 weeks, and my focus is on securing this deal. No one challenged him further. But as the meeting wrapped up, Reynolds hesitated. His eyes flickered with something close to concern. He had worked with Nate long enough to sense the deeper issues, but he also knew better than to ask. Nate never welcomed personal questions. After the meeting, Nate retreated to his private office. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment of silence. A flash of guilt crept in. He wasn't blind. He knew his words had hurt Isabel, but he convinced himself it was necessary. "We can't both be stressed," he rationalized. "She should be resting, not parading around at a celebrity-filled event where every camera phone is pointed her way." But deep down, he knew there was another reason, a thought he refused to say out loud. The truth was, she looked different now. The glow he once admired had been replaced by tired eyes and an uneven complexion, and that realization unnerved him more than he was willing to admit. Nathaniel Lancaster had always been a man of logic. Numbers, projections, deals, that was his world, and he excelled there. Emotions, empathy, the delicate, intimate corners of marriage. Somewhere along the way, he had lost his touch. Or maybe, deep down, he had convinced himself that those things were luxuries he could no longer afford in his meteoric climb to success. Sitting in his office, Nate flicked through his pitch deck. He was trying to focus, trying to drown out the nagging thoughts that had been lingering in the back of his mind for weeks. Isabel looked different now. The woman he had once admired for her effortless beauty, the woman who had once turned heads at every gala, was no longer the same. And whether he wanted to admit it or not, it bothered him. Of course, he told himself, it was just hormones, a temporary phase. After the baby arrived, things would return to normal. But until then, was it really so wrong to want to keep that image away from the public eye? Shaking off the thought, Nate turned his attention back to the screen. Numbers, projections, potential alliances, this was what mattered. Not whatever was happening back at the estate. Back at the estate, something remarkable was happening. Isabel sat in front of a grand vanity mirror, her heart pounding as the finishing touches of her transformation came together. Angeline had completely taken over one of the mansion's guest suites, turning it into a personal styling studio. Naomi flitted in and out, checking the guest list updates and coordinating last-minute details. Meanwhile, Yoshi Tanaka, an elite makeup artist with a quiet, meticulous touch, worked carefully to enhance Isabel's features. As he blended foundation and lightly contoured her cheekbones, Isabel noticed something in the mirror that she hadn't seen in a long time, a brightness in her eyes. Not just from the makeup, not just from the transformation, but from something deeper. Something she had forgotten she possessed. Herself. Across the room, Angeline examined every seam of the midnight blue gown. She adjusted lace details, reworked the neckline, and made tiny, imperceptible tweaks with the precision of a master artist. "Perfection is in the details," she murmured, stepping back to admire her work. Naomi glanced at her phone and let out a low whistle. The paparazzi are already camped outside Calloway's private venue. Isabel exhaled, gripping the armrest of the chair. "I've never been to something this high profile. Even our wedding wasn't this extravagant." Naomi took her hand, squeezing gently. "I know it's daunting," she said. "But remember, you're not doing this for the cameras. You're doing this to stand in your truth." She met Isabel's gaze in the mirror. "You're reminding Nate of the woman he married." A flicker of resolve ignited in Isabel's chest. "I'm also reminding myself of who I am," she said quietly. "Beyond this pregnancy, beyond his dismissive remarks." Naomi's lips curled into a proud smile. "That's exactly the right attitude." 2 hours later, Isabel stood before a full-length mirror, transformed. Yoshi had woven her hair into a soft, elegant updo, with delicate tendrils framing her face. Her makeup was subtle but striking. Smoky eyes that deepened her gaze, a soft blush to highlight her cheekbones, and a nude lip that balanced the dramatic eye makeup. But it was the gown, the midnight blue silk masterpiece, that truly completed the vision. It hugged her curves perfectly, accentuating her growing belly instead of hiding it. The silk flowed like liquid, trailing behind her in an ethereal train. She stepped back, and her breath caught in her throat. Was that truly her reflection? Because the woman staring back at her wasn't just beautiful. She was regal. She was confident. She was powerful. For the first time in a long time, Isabel stood taller, as if the gown had somehow restored the part of her she thought she had lost. Naomi clapped her hands, tears brimming in her eyes. "Oh, Isabel, you're stunning. Absolutely radiant." Angeline beamed like a proud mother. "I knew it," she declared. I just knew that color would be mesmerizing on you. Isabel's eyes glistened. She turned to Naomi and Angeline, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, both of you, for reminding me that I can feel beautiful again. At that moment, the door creaked open, and standing at the threshold was Nathaniel Lancaster. He froze. His entire body went still, his hand gripping the doorknob as if he had just walked into an entirely different world. His gaze landed on Isabel, and for the first time in months, he looked truly, deeply speechless. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension in the room thickened, as if even the air itself was holding its breath. Nathaniel Lancaster stood frozen at the threshold, his eyes locked onto Isabel. He took a slow, cautious step forward, his gaze scanning her from head to toe. His expression flickered, a mix of awe, confusion, and something else. Annoyance, or maybe discomfort. As if he was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time in months. "What is all this?" he asked, his voice measured, as if trying to maintain control. Naomi stepped forward, unbothered by his reaction. Her chin lifted, her confidence unwavering. "We're preparing Isabel for the gala," she said smoothly. "You know, the one hosted by Richard Calloway?" Nate's expression flickered. Shock, admiration, and unease. His eyes darted to her belly, then back to her radiant face. He opened his mouth, then hesitated. "I thought you weren't going?" Isabel met his gaze, steady and firm. "I changed my mind," she said simply. Her voice was soft, but there was an undeniable edge of resolve behind it. "I want to be there. I want to support you." For a moment, Nate said nothing. He just looked at her, really looked at her, and the truth hit him harder than he expected. He hadn't seen her in so long, not like this. Not with this quiet, unshakable strength. Not with this undeniable presence. For the first time in a long time, he felt small. The woman in front of him wasn't just beautiful, she was formidable. And suddenly, he wasn't sure what to do with that realization. Clearing his throat, he shifted his stance. "All right, well, we'll talk later." Then, before anyone could say another word, he pivoted on his heel and walked out, leaving behind a swirl of anticipation, uncertainty, and unresolved tension. Naomi and Angeline exchanged glances. Isabel exhaled, a strange mixture of triumph and anxiety settling in her chest. Nate had seen her, truly seen her, for the first time in a long, long time. But whether this was the beginning of a reconciliation or another inevitable rift, only time would tell. The Calloway estate was a masterpiece of modern luxury set just beyond the outskirts of Seattle. A winding driveway, lined with sculpted hedges and golden uplighting, led to a grand entrance where paparazzi cameras flashed relentlessly. Luxury cars lined up, one after another, each dropping off members of the world's elite. Billionaires, tech moguls, royals, celebrities. Inside, the reception hall was nothing short of breathtaking. Towering marble columns, a dazzling crystal chandelier casting soft golden light, walls adorned with priceless contemporary art. Waiters moved effortlessly through the room, offering champagne flutes to guests who whispered and laughed beneath the gentle hum of an orchestra playing in the background. It was a world of power, influence, and spectacle, a world where appearances mattered more than anything else. And tonight, Isabel was about to step into it, on her own terms. She inhaled deeply as the limousine neared the entrance. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she kept her breathing steady. Naomi's words echoed in her mind. "You're beautiful, you belong, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Beside her, Nate sat in unnerving silence. His Armani tux was flawless, his custom-made shoes polished to perfection, but his expression, torn, between pride and apprehension, between knowing he should be grateful and wishing he had prepared for this moment better. Finally, as the car rolled to a stop, he turned to her. "Are you ready?" Isabel lifted her chin. "Yes." The door opened. Nate stepped out first, greeted instantly by a blinding storm of camera flashes. Photographers shouted his name, calling for him to turn, to pose. Then, he turned back toward the car and extended his hand. For a brief moment, Isabel hesitated. Memories of his harsh words whispered at the back of her mind. But then she reminded herself, she wasn't doing this for him, she was doing this for herself. So, with deliberate grace, she placed her hand in his and stepped out. The reaction was instantaneous. The cameras erupted in a frenzy. Flashes exploded. Shouts filled the air. "Mr. Lancaster, over here. Who designed your wife's dress? Isabel, you look incredible. How far along are you?" She felt Nate tense beside her. Was it excitement or was it discomfort? It didn't matter, because as they stepped into the grand reception hall, something remarkable happened. Heads turned. People who had known Nate for years, his colleagues, his investors, his so-called friends, they whispered among themselves, eyes wide, clearly caught off guard by the stunning woman on his arm. And in that moment, for the first time in far too long, Isabel felt powerful again. Moving through the crowded reception hall, Isabel felt something she hadn't felt in months. She wasn't just standing beside Nate, following his lead. She was walking with him, as an equal, as a woman who deserved to be seen. Throughout the evening, they encountered acquaintances, business partners, and philanthropic leaders. One by one, guests greeted Isabel warmly, complimenting her gown, congratulating her on the pregnancy, expressing genuine interest in her presence. She responded with grace, her voice steady, her eyes shining with renewed confidence. At one point, Richard Calloway himself approached, his wife beside him. A man whose approval could change the course of entire industries, Calloway was known for his strategic mind and relentless pursuit of innovation with impact. He shook Nate's hand firmly. "Nathaniel, good to see you." Then he turned to Isabel, his expression softening. "And you must be Isabel. I have to say, you look absolutely radiant. Congratulations on your growing family." She smiled warmly. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. It's an honor to be here." Meanwhile, Nate was deep in conversation with Calloway, pitching his climate change initiative. At first, he stumbled, momentarily thrown off by Isabel's presence and the attention she commanded. But he quickly regained his composure, diving into a well-rehearsed discussion on AI-driven environmental solutions. Isabel listened, resisting the old urge to withdraw, the old habit of shrinking beside her husband, letting him take the spotlight. Not tonight. Tonight, she stood beside him. Not as a trophy, not as an accessory, but as a force of her own. And when the moment was right, she stepped into the conversation herself. "Technology is a powerful tool," she interjected smoothly. "But its true potential isn't just in large-scale interventions. It's in how we empower grassroots movements. Local communities need access, education, and support to make real change sustainable." Calloway raised an intrigued brow. "That's an excellent point. Have you worked in community engagement?" Isabel nodded. "I spent years managing philanthropic events, coordinating efforts between donors and on-the-ground activists. I've seen firsthand how access to resources can transform entire regions." For the first time that night, Nate turned to her with something close to surprise, as if he was seeing a side of her he had long since forgotten. Calloway seemed impressed. "We should talk more about this. I'd love to hear your insights." And just like that, Isabel was no longer just Nate Lancaster's wife. She was a woman worth listening to. As the evening continued, Isabel mingled effortlessly with the world's most powerful figures. She discussed environmental policy with investors. She exchanged maternal advice with philanthropists. She engaged in meaningful conversations, not just small talk. Her pregnancy bump, once a source of insecurity, became a conversation starter. A symbol of strength, not weakness. Every now and then, she caught Nate watching her from across the room. His gaze unreadable. Admiration, uncertainty, guilt. She couldn't be sure, but she hoped, just maybe, that something was stirring in him. Midway through the night, Nate gently took her arm. "Come with me." He led her through the opulent ballroom, weaving between the guests, until they reached a quieter corner by an ornate fountain. The water sparkled under the soft glow of the lights, creating a serene contrast to the bustling energy of the gala. He gestured to a bench, and they both sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, he cleared his throat. "I have to admit, you really surprised me tonight." Isabel tilted her head, folding her hands over her belly. "Surprised me how?" Nate hesitated. For once, it seemed like he was choosing his words carefully. I didn't realize." He exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "You look incredible. And the way you handled yourself tonight, graceful, confident, even Calloway was impressed." A subtle smile played at Isabel's lips. "I haven't changed that much, Nate." She met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Maybe you just forgot who I was." The words hung between them. A quiet admonishment. A truth too painful to ignore. Nate looked down, fiddling with the silk handkerchief in his pocket. His voice, when it came, was softer than she had ever heard it. "I'm sorry. The words were barely audible over the trickle of the fountain. Isabel felt her chest tighten. She had waited so long to hear those words. But the question remained. Was it enough? She placed a hand gently over his. "Nate, we have a child on the way." Her voice didn't waver. "We can't keep living like strangers. We need to remember why we got married in the first place." He nodded slowly. "You're right." But whether that acknowledgement would blossom into real change, or whether it was just a fleeting moment of regret, she couldn't tell. All she knew was that tonight she had reclaimed her dignity. And if Nate truly wanted to atone, if he truly wanted to fix what had been broken, it was a path they would have to walk together. Back inside the ballroom, the gala continued in a whirlwind of champagne toasts and high-profile photo ops. But amidst the spectacle, one thing was undeniable. People were looking at them. Not just at Nate. Not just at the billionaire CEO with his polished pitch and powerful alliances, but at Isabel, the woman who had reminded the world and herself who she truly was. After their private conversation by the ornate fountain, Nathaniel Lancaster led Isabel toward a small circle of influential figures. Among them stood Richard Callaway, Jeff Bezos, and several philanthropic entrepreneurs, deep in discussion about global education initiatives. As they approached, Nate did something unexpected. With a warmth she hadn't heard in his voice for months, he said, "This is my wife, Isabel Lancaster. She's been a major force behind my philanthropic outlook." For a brief moment, Isabel was stunned. He had never publicly credited her like that before. Not once. In all the years they had attended events together, she had always been the quiet supporter, the one who smiled politely while he took the spotlight. And now, he was acknowledging her, not just as his wife, but as an equal. The validation was bittersweet, considering how distant he had been for so long. But tonight, she wasn't going to dwell on the past. She was going to own this moment. The conversation turned to education technology. How to bridge the gap between privilege and accessibility. How AI could revolutionize learning. How resources could be better distributed to underprivileged communities. Isabel spoke with confidence, drawing from her years of experience in event coordination and community outreach. Bezos nodded thoughtfully, intrigued by her perspective. And as she talked, she noticed something else. Nate had changed. His posture was different. He no longer carried himself like a lone wolf, detached and hyper-focused on his own goals. Instead, there was a subtle shift, a realization that partnership was just as powerful as independence. Even the way he placed his hand on the small of her back, guiding her gently through the crowd so she wouldn't be jostled, it felt different, more present, more protective. As the night progressed, the orchestra played a soft melody, signaling the beginning of a formal dance. The lights dimmed. Couples drifted onto the polished floor, their movements elegant and effortless. Isabel hesitated. Dancing in her current state seemed almost impossible. She was heavily pregnant, and though Angeline had ensured her heels were comfortable, balance was still a challenge. Then, to her surprise, Nate turned to her. "Would you like to dance?" Her heart fluttered. She searched his face, half expecting a catch. But his expression was genuine. For the first time in a long time, there were no ulterior motives in his eyes. Just him, just her, just them. And so she whispered, "Yes." He led her onto the dance floor, his movements careful and deliberate. The music was a slow waltz, soft, lilting, intimate. Isabel placed one hand on his shoulder, the other in his grasp, her baby bump resting gently between them. At first, he moved tentatively, almost as if he had forgotten how to hold her. But then, muscle memory returned. They swayed together, the soft glow of chandeliers casting golden light over them. And for a few minutes, there was no past resentment, no harsh words, no pressure to maintain an image, just them, wrapped in a moment that felt almost familiar, almost like their wedding dance all those years ago in Napa Valley. A time when they had looked into each other's eyes and seen nothing but hope for the future. Isabel felt tears welling, but she blinked them away. This was the Nate she had fallen in love with, the one who had been gentle, the one who had been sincere, the one who had once promised to always put her first. She leaned closer, resting her cheek lightly against his shoulder. "Nate," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the music. "I've missed you." His grip tightened slightly. A moment of hesitation, then softly he said, "I'm here now." But there was regret in his voice, because they both knew. Now wasn't enough. She pulled back, searching his face. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was gentle but firm. "When did appearances become more important than our family?" Nate exhaled slowly, closing his eyes for a brief second. When he spoke, it wasn't with defensiveness or pride, but with something raw, something real. "I don't know," he admitted. "Somewhere along the way, I got caught up in everything. The success, the power, the image. I was terrified of anything that might make me seem less than perfect in front of these people." His voice dipped lower, almost ashamed. "I convinced myself that if you came looking tired, looking pregnant in a way that wasn't glamorous, it would undermine all the work I've done." Isabel swallowed hard, sadness mingling with understanding. "But you see now, don't you?" she murmured. "That it doesn't have to be that way?" He nodded. Reaching up, he brushed a stray curl from her forehead, his touch gentle. "I see that now." A faint, self-deprecating smile tugged at his lips. "Tonight, Isabel, everyone has been talking about you." He shook his head slightly, a mix of admiration and guilt flashing in his eyes. "How graceful you are, how intelligent you are. And I—" He hesitated, voice dropping to a whisper. "I almost let myself forget." Nathaniel Lancaster held Isabel's hand tightly, as if afraid to let go. "I was a fool," he admitted, his voice quiet but steady. "I doubted you. I forgot who you were." Isabel's fingers curled around his. "Nate, I appreciate your apology." She paused, her gaze never leaving his. "But I need more than words." Nate swallowed hard, nodding. "I know. We're about to have a child," she continued. "This can't be a one-time correction. We need to fix the root of our problems." For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, under the warm glow of the chandeliers, his eyes softened with something real, something she hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm ready to try," he whispered. "I love you, Isabel, and I want to be there for you and our baby." A single tear rolled down her cheek. She managed a small, tentative smile. "Then let's do it together." They continued to dance. Neither of them knew what the future held. But beneath the grandeur of the Calloway estate, amidst the swirling couples and the star-studded crowd, Nathaniel and Isabel Lancaster had found something that many had written off. The morning after the gala, the media erupted. Socialites and industry insiders couldn't stop talking about Isabel Lancaster's stunning debut at one of the most exclusive gatherings of the year. Gossip columns called her the new face of maternity elegance. Fashion blogs raved about the breathtaking midnight blue gown, calling it a symbol of confidence and power. Headlines splashed across social media, "Move over Hollywood, meet the new maternity icon." For once, the attention wasn't on Nate. It was on Isabel. Sitting in his home office, Nate scrolled through the articles. For a man who thrived on positive press, he should have been elated. But instead, he felt something else, something he hadn't expected. Reflection. For the first time, he saw what the world had seen in Isabel all along. Her strength, her beauty, her undeniable presence, and it made him realize just how blind he had been. Meanwhile, Isabel was navigating her newfound spotlight with grace. Naomi fielded calls from reporters wanting interviews about Isabel's transformation. Even maternity fashion magazines reached out, eager to feature her story. One afternoon, as they sat together in the estate's sunroom, Naomi leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. "We should use this moment for something bigger." Isabel raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Naomi grinned. "Philanthropy." She gestured toward her phone. "You have a platform now. This isn't just about fashion. It's about showing that pregnancy doesn't take away a woman's power. We can use this attention to support causes close to your heart." Isabel considered it, wrapping her hands around her warm cup of tea. "Like maternal health care?" she mused. "Community-based support for pregnant women in underprivileged areas?" Naomi nodded eagerly. "Exactly. Show people that pregnancy isn't a weakness, it's a force, and that women can be both mothers and advocates for real change." Isabel took a deep breath. If it helps even one expecting mother feel less isolated or overlooked, she exhaled, a soft smile forming, "Then I'm in." But despite Nate's sincere apology, old habits died hard. He was still Nathaniel Lancaster, the man whose life revolved around power, deals, and the relentless pursuit of success. Though he made an effort, checking in on her, asking about doctor's appointments and baby preparations, he was still often absent, still consumed by his latest venture. a philanthropic AI project set to revolutionize climate research. There were still business trips, still nights where he was locked in his office for hours. And Isabel, she noticed, because effort wasn't the same as change. One evening, as they sat together in the lounge, Isabel made a decision. She looked at Nate, hesitant but firm. "I want you to come to my next ultrasound appointment." He glanced up from his phone, slightly caught off guard. "You do?" She nodded. "I'd like you to meet the new obstetrician. She keeps asking if my husband will ever show up." A flicker of something passed over his expression. He checked his planner, his fingers hovering over an upcoming business meeting. For a second, Isabel prepared herself for the usual response. "I'm too busy. I'll make the next one. You know how my schedule is." But instead, he exhaled and said, "I can reschedule it. I'll be there." Isabel felt a breath of relief escape her chest. A breath she hadn't even realized she was holding. "Thank you, Nate." The hospital waiting room was quiet, filled with the soft murmur of expectant parents flipping through magazines. The walls were painted in soft pastels, lined with posters about fetal development. Nate sat beside Isabel, tapping his fingers against his knee. When their names were called, he stood, following her into the examination room. The ultrasound machine hummed softly, a cool gel applied to Isabel's stomach. Nate stood by her side, his hand covered hers. And then, in grainy black and white on the screen before them, they saw their child. Tiny, fragile, a small life with a rapidly beating heart. Tears pricked at Isabel's eyes, and for the first time she saw something else in Nate's. Not calculation, not strategy, not concern for appearances, but awe. For the first time, he wasn't looking at her through the lens of the public eye. He wasn't thinking about business deals, social status, or image. For the first time in a long time, Nathaniel Lancaster was just a man staring at his future. And it took his breath away. The ultrasound screen flickered, illuminating the dimly lit room with soft grayscale images. The doctor's voice was calm, explaining each detail. The tiny limbs, the delicate spine, the faint but unmistakable profile of a minuscule face. Nathaniel Lancaster's gaze locked onto the screen, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. "That's our baby." His voice was quieter than Isabel had ever heard it before. She squeezed his hand gently, her own heart swelling with emotion. "Yes, Nate, that's our baby." On the drive home, Nate was unusually silent. He sat in the passenger seat, staring at the ultrasound photo in his hands, his thumb running absently over the image. Finally, he spoke. "I can't believe I almost shut you out of that gala." His voice was laced with regret. He turned to face her, his blue eyes unusually bright. "I can't believe I made you feel like you weren't good enough when you're carrying this miracle." Isabel's chest tightened, caught between sorrow and hope. She reached for his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "You were lost for a while," she said softly, "but we can still find our way if you're really committed to this." He held her gaze, his expression raw with something she hadn't seen in a long time. Conviction. "I am," he said. "I want us to be a family. A real family." Under the warm afternoon sun, in the middle of a bustling hospital parking lot, they embraced. The hum of traffic, the distant chatter of nurses and patients, it all faded away. All that remained was this moment. Isabel clung to his words, praying that this time, Nate's promises would translate into something real. In the months that followed, many things shifted. Isabel's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and she discovered a new sense of purpose. With Naomi's guidance, she threw herself into maternal health advocacy, working closely with charities that provided medical resources for pregnant women who lacked insurance or family support. She even hosted a small charity event at the Lancaster estate, raising significant funds for a local shelter. It felt good. It felt right. And for the first time in a long time, Isabel felt like herself again. Meanwhile, Nate was trying. Really trying. He started clearing his schedule at least once a week to spend time with Isabel. Something that once would have been unthinkable for him. He attended doctor's visits, no longer treating them as an obligation, but as something sacred. One Saturday morning, he even accompanied her to a prenatal yoga class. His stiff posture and awkward attempts at poses had the entire room laughing, including himself. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered joy, one that reminded them both of simpler times. Even within Lancaster Industries, changes were taking root. Nate, once single-mindedly focused on expansion, began to prioritize corporate responsibility. Inspired perhaps by Isabel's influence, he started scheduling volunteer days for employees, donating a portion of company profits to philanthropic initiatives. Delgado noticed the change. He watched as Nate spoke differently to his staff, less abrupt, more open, more willing to listen. It was subtle, but it was real. For the first time, Nathaniel Lancaster was starting to understand that legacy wasn't just about success, it was about impact. But as Isabel's due date approached, new fears began to creep in. Late at night, lying awake in bed, she couldn't shake the nagging question. Would Nate really be there? Not just financially. Not just as a man who made grand gestures and public apologies, but as a father, as a partner. Would he show up for the quiet moments, for the sleepless nights, for the first words, the first steps, the small but precious milestones? Or would she find herself raising this child alone, while Nate chased the next big deal? One evening, as they lounged in the living room, Isabel decided to ask. She sat on the couch, feet propped up on a cushion, hands resting over her round belly. Nate sat beside her, scrolling through emails on his phone. She took a breath. When the baby comes, she said carefully, I need to know if you're going to be fully involved. Not just financially, but emotionally. Nate stilled. For a moment he didn't speak. Then he put his phone down, exhaling. I've been thinking a lot about that. He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze flickering toward her. I know my track record hasn't been the best, he admitted. But I want to be different. I want to be someone our child can look up to, someone you can rely on. Isabel studied him, searching for hesitation, for uncertainty. But for once, she didn't see it. She only saw sincerity. That means you might have to make compromises, she pointed out. Step back from certain deals. Delegate more. He nodded. I already have. She raised an eyebrow, skeptical. He smirked. Delgado's been taking on more responsibilities. We've hired 2 new executives to share the workload. Then, his expression softened. I want to be there when our child says their first words, takes their first steps. I don't want to miss those moments. Relief and gratitude flooded Isabel's chest. She reached for his hand, and this time, he was the one who laced his fingers through hers. In that moment, she believed him. For the first time, she truly believed that Nate Lancaster had chosen his family. For the first time in a long time, Nathaniel and Isabel Lancaster were finally on the same page. As Isabel's due date drew closer, the media frenzy surrounding her elegant transformation only grew stronger. Paparazzi camped outside their estate, eager to capture photos of the glamorous wife of Nathaniel Lancaster. But Isabel handled it gracefully. She focused on her philanthropic work, using the public's attention to shine a light on maternal health advocacy rather than fashion headlines. What surprised her most, though, was Nate's reaction. Rather than basking in the media's adoration, he shielded her from it. He became protective, attentive, stepping in to ensure her privacy was respected. It was a shift she never expected to see. Then it happened. A whirlwind of hospital lights, a flurry of doctors and nurses, a chorus of beeping monitors and rushed instructions. Isabel went into labor. Nate was right there by her side, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement as she fought through each agonizing contraction. Hours passed in a blur of pain, anticipation, and sheer exhaustion. Then, a piercing cry filled the room. The sound of new life. Tears blurred Isabel's vision as the doctor gently placed their newborn daughter against her chest. Tiny. Warm. Perfect. Nate's hands trembled as he reached out, brushing his fingers against the wisps of soft hair on their daughter's head. His voice, usually so controlled, broke with emotion. She's perfect. His eyes lifted to Isabel's, glistening with a depth of love she had never seen before. You're perfect. Isabel, exhausted and overwhelmed, managed a breathless whisper, I love you. He kissed her forehead, his grip on her hand tightening. I love you too. In that moment, there were no paparazzi, no business meetings, no pressure, just a mother, a father, and their child. For the first time, nothing else mattered. 1 month later, the Lancaster estate felt more alive than ever. Gone was the tension, the formality that had once defined their home. Now, the halls were filled with soft lullabies, the rustling of tiny blankets, the occasional sleepy cry that sent everyone scurrying. The nursery, designed by a renowned interior decorator, was a dreamy sanctuary, soft pastel walls, hand-painted whimsical murals, a cozy rocking chair by the window, Isabel's favorite spot for feeding their daughter. Her name? Amelia. One evening, Nate sat cross-legged on the plush carpet, still dressed in his business slacks and rolled-up sleeves. He was assembling a baby swing, scowling at the confusing instruction manual. Isabel watched from her rocking chair, cradling Amelia in her arms. She smiled. It was a small moment, but it was meaningful. Here was Nathaniel Lancaster, billionaire mogul, kneeling on the floor, determined to build something for his daughter with his own hands. Not buying it, not delegating it, just doing it. Of course, old habits didn't disappear overnight. There were moments when Nate's phone buzzed with a call from a high-profile investor at odd hours, when Isabel saw the familiar flicker of tension cross his face. But more often than not, he let it ring a few extra times. He finished feeding Amelia first. He kissed Isabel's forehead before stepping away to handle business. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And those small seconds, they added up. One afternoon, Naomi arrived at the estate, but this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, a small camera crew followed, carefully unpacking their equipment. Isabel frowned slightly, rocking Amelia in her arms. "What's all this?" Naomi grinned. "A documentary." Isabel's brows lifted. Naomi settled onto the couch, adjusting the bracelets on her wrist. "I pitched an idea to a few producers," she explained. "A short film about your journey into philanthropy, about maternal health advocacy, about the shelter you're funding." Isabel hesitated. Her first instinct was to decline. She didn't want to expose Amelia to the public eye too soon. She didn't want this to be about her personal life. But Naomi saw the hesitation and leaned forward, speaking softly. "I know, Izzy, and I promise we'll be careful. This won't be about luxury or scandal or gossip." She paused. "This is about women, about mothers who feel alone, about showing them they don't have to disappear during pregnancy, that they can still have a voice, that they still matter." Isabel exhaled slowly, looking down at her daughter's peaceful face. She thought about the countless women she had met over the past few months. Women who had felt forgotten, women who had felt unseen. And she knew, if this could help even one mother feel less invisible, it would be worth it. She looked up at Naomi, nodding. "Let's do it." Naomi beamed. "You won't regret this." As the crew began setting up in the estate's sunroom, Isabel ran a hand over Amelia's tiny fingers. She had started this journey as a woman lost in someone else's shadow. Now, she was stepping into her own light, and she was bringing others with her. Isabel handed Amelia to the nanny for a moment, smoothing down the fabric of her dress as she prepared for the interview. She took a deep breath. "It's worth it," she murmured. "If this encourages even one mother to believe in herself again." The interview covered everything, from Isabel's initial insecurities to the dramatic transformation that had sparked media attention. She spoke candidly about the pain of feeling unseen, of being dismissed by the man she loved. She didn't shy away from the truth, how Nate's obsession with public image had wounded her deeply. But she also spoke about forgiveness, about growth, about how love, when nurtured with honesty, could find its way back. Nate joined for a brief segment. He looked nervous at first, vulnerable even, but when the camera turned to him, he didn't hesitate. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I got caught up in my own pride, in public image, and I neglected what truly mattered, my wife, my family. I hope our story proves that it's never too late to change, never too late to stand by the ones you love." When the filming wrapped, Naomi's camera crew began packing up. She turned to Isabel, eyes shining with pride. "You were amazing," Naomi said, pulling her into a tight hug. "So real. People need that honesty." Nate, holding Amelia again, gave a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you for believing in us." Naomi grinned. "Always." As the last rays of afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, Isabel turned toward Nate. "You know," she mused, tilting her head, "we've come a long way since the day you refused to take me to that gala." A flicker of guilt crossed his face, but this time he didn't look away. He nodded. "It's a part of our story now," he admitted, "a reminder of how blind I was." She reached out, fingers brushing against his arm. "And how much we've grown." The room fell into a comfortable silence. The only sound was Amelia's soft cooing, her tiny fingers curling against Nate's chest. Looking at them, her husband, her daughter, the life they had rebuilt, Isabel felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Their marriage had been tested, nearly fractured by pride and superficiality, but in the end, they had found their way back to each other. Not through perfection, not through grand gestures, but through love, humility, and the willingness to truly see one another again. Of course, the real work was just beginning. Parenthood was uncharted territory, and Nate, a man still balancing the demands of a global empire, would have to learn what it meant to be present. There would be mistakes, there would be moments of doubt, but every shared glance, every small touch, every laughter-filled night in their nursery reminded them both that life's greatest legacy wasn't in wealth or status or public opinion. It was in the love that filled their home. In the end, Nathaniel and Isabel Lancaster's story was never just about a stunning makeover at a high-profile gala. It was about rediscovering the deeper reasons that bring two people together. Their journey proved that no matter how lost we become, no matter how distant, how distracted, how disconnected, there is always a way back, if we choose to fight for it, if we choose love, humility, and understanding, if we choose to see the ones we cherish for who they truly are, not just who we expect them to be. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of second chances and the strength of transformation, like this video, share it with someone who might need a little spark of hope. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel, because here we celebrate love, we celebrate growth, we celebrate the triumph of the heart over life's biggest challenges, and we hope you'll be part of the journey. Thank you for watching.